of, let me try and load up the Daily Nation, the Star, the front page of the Star and the front page of the People Daily. And this is what you're waking up to this morning. Let me try and just put it in full for you to see what is on the front page of the People Daily this morning and the Star, which I didn't have the soft copy, but I'm trying to load it up for you so that you can see what is on the front page of the Star quickly. And this is how it looks today. The front page of the Star. ATM thieves use special jackpotting technique. That is what we have on the front page of the Star. It says that the savvy youths use ATM jackpotting to siphon millions from Barclays bank machine, and also church in dilemma over dirty cash. That is what we have on the front page of the Star there. You can see also the flag reading trick used in USA, Europe and Latin America. This is what has been also exported here in the country and how they're siphoning money from your ATMs. Also, Gideon Moy's wife Zara and ex-rugby boss proposed as Nairobi hospital directors, and also primary school teachers may teach in secondary under new curriculum. That is another story that you want to follow also inside the Star. Allow me to show you also what we have on the front page of the People Daily, and this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the People Daily. And try and load up that quickly for you so that you can see also what is a splash today on the front page of the People Daily. Getting over there quickly, and this is how it looks for you. It's loading. It's loading. That is all about Ruto. Blow to Ruto as Anglican head blocks political money. It says move by country's second largest church is in tune with detractor schemes to close DP's space and curtail his influence as a generous giver to houses of God. As intrigues for 2022 State House race intensify. We have a quote here from Ole Sapit, Archbishop Ole Sapit, saying, quote unquote, let the pulpit be for the worship so that when we are leading the service, there is no interference from other people who spell out subjects, not the agenda of the church. That is a story you can follow on page 6 of the People Daily. Also, Sozuri Frida on 12 million shillings cash bail after spending Easter in cell is another story that you want to follow also on page 2 of the People Daily. Finally, the skies open up. That is for Uganda. You can follow the story on, not really the story for Uganda, but I think the rains here. I was thinking about also the Uganda Airlines that have taken also the aircraft that have taken to the skies as well. But this is the breakthrough, I should say, that we've been waiting for as far as rains are concerned. And you can see also a related picture there. This is in the People Daily today. Let's see if we can get the editorial cartoon quickly for you to see what it holds for us, or what they've done for us. That is the editorial cartoonist inside our dailies today. Let's just begin with Victor to just see what he's done for us inside the Daily Nation today. Also Gado and Stano as well inside the People Daily. And this is what he's done for us today. I'm trying to get it quickly for you so that you can see it. This is inside the Daily Nation today. And it's all about the trip to China right now as far as Right Honorable Raila Odinga is concerned, and Uhuru Kenyatta going to seek for more money for the SGR. And this is what he's done for us. My stand on foreign debt is, of course, it is indecipherable. You can't actually read it. That's how it looks clearly. And you can see there, appeal in hand, going to China, seeking for more help. I'll leave it for you to decipher that. This is what now has been drawn by Victor inside the Daily Nation today. Let's see what we have inside the Standard and see what Gado has done for us. And it's all about also issues to do with leadership in Africa as far as CC is concerned. I'm trying to head over there quickly for you also to get a glimpse of what they've done for us today inside the Standard today. Getting over there quickly. It's loading quickly. And it's all about Abdullah, or not really, but President of Egypt, that is Sisi. And you remember Sisi also is seeking to extend his term, and they're seeking also to amend the constitution. And this is what has been aptly captured by Gado inside the Standard today on page 12, the editorial cartoon. Look at that. Abdel Fattah Sisi. Abdel Fattah Sisi, that is sitting there as a pharaoh. And you can see the military has been gagged. The parliament also is under his control. The judiciary also is caged there as a parrot. And that is for you, Egypt right now. Remember also, he's the head and the chair of the African Union right now. We shall also be looking at that much later with our panelists who are already here. This is happening in Egypt. There was an AU summit, and as I've mentioned also, South Sudan, not really South Sudan, but Sudan and Libya. Libya's security also is was on the table. That is another story that also will follow for you. Let's see what also has been drawn by, this is Stano inside the People Daily, the editorial page, that is page 10. Trying to load it up for you quickly for you to see it as well. This is what he's drawn for us. It's loading quickly. Right, and this is it. It says that the intro, this I will stick to the agenda. This is MP's very important debate. More allowances, more bodyguards, cars, concubines, houses, free loans, super health cover, helicopters, etc. Remember, Parliament was back in session yesterday, and I think this is now what Stano has actually drawn for us inside the People Daily today. I'll leave it for you to decipher that. Those are your editorial cartoons, and also the dailies. Make sure you grab a copy of the Daily Nation as well. If you're joining us this morning, this is how it looks on the front page of the Daily Nation. China loan derailleur about Tan road to Beijing. How did one of the harshest critics of President Kenyatta's pet railway project become one of the biggest supporters? This story continues on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. But for now, we swing for the fences by looking at the highlights. A false start. Governments insist new curriculum is successful and will continue amidst protests. The church commits to step up in the fight against corruption. And AU gives Sudan military 3 months to implement reforms. Now, the Council of Governors has asked the Senate to investigate the controversial 38 billion shillings medical equipment leasing project, for which each of the 47 counties repays 200 million shillings annually. The governors termed the project a fraud and a scandal in the making, saying they were arm-twisted and blackmailed by the national government into accepting the deal.
It was a very good source of kickbacks between the people in government and the suppliers of the equipment. Up to this very day, we don't even know who those suppliers were.
We don't know who the suppliers are. We have not looked at their agreement between themselves, suppliers, and the Ministry of Health. We have never. But why I signed is last minute is that my equipment was delivered to Kakamega General Hospital at night on a Saturday, and I want to be quoted here. At night on a Saturday in cartons. And then we refused to receive them. And then all the chiefs were told to go to funerals and say, Oparanya has refused equipment, that's why people are dying in Kakamega. So I was blackmailed that way.
One person who refused to sign, and he's not here, he's not a governor now. Yes. Governor Asha Groot. He said he would never sign and over his dead body, and he didn't sign. So at least there is someone who stood strong to prove that.
If there is any money for buying of equipment, it is us who know which equipment we require. So this money should be provided to counties as conditional grants so that we are able to buy equipment depending on our varied needs.
And detectives from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission grilled Kenya Ports Authority Managing Director Dr. Daniel Manduku over the alleged irregular award of a 40 billion shilling shillings tender for the construction of the new Kipevu oil terminal in Mombasa. Manduku asserted that due diligence was done in the award of a multi-billion project to China Communications Construction Company, maintaining that KPA was aware that the company had been debarred by the World Bank and that there were no restrictions on their engagement in bidding for the pipeline contract.
In the conditions of tender, the company had already declared that they had this debarment, which was in line with tender conditions.
So you were aware of it?
Yes, we were aware.
Looking at the whole process, whether any procurement laws were not followed, and whether we did not follow all the steps that are required.
The multi-sectoral initiative against corruption is now asking church leaders to keep the pulpit and the house of God free of partisan politics and suspect donations. The leader of the Anglican Church, Archbishop Jackson Ole Sapit, gave his commitment moving forward as part of the initiative challenging fellow church leaders not to entertain politicians nor their generations or generous donations.
My unequivocal commitment today is to mobilize all our congregation to join the war against corruption. I urge all our bishops to shun partisan politics from the pulpit. Let us not allow Harambee monies to be a subtle way of sanitizing the corrupt leaders. Even as yesterday, I was seeing church leaders saying, we will welcome that money because we don't know how to clean, how to identify dirty and clean money. Yes, it is true, but our teaching in the church is that, and I said that during my Easter message, let us learn as a church to worship God with our resources quietly.
Now, Trade and Industry Cabinet Secretary Peter Munya has dismissed claims that there are special forces set up to target particular individuals on matters corruption. He said he has challenged those implicated in the dam scandal to be transparent and explain to Kenyans why the dams never took off. He spoke during the launch of a new mass Wrigley confectioneries plant in Athi River.
If you are involved in constructing dams that never take off and never store any water, and the billions of money belonging to the Kenyan people who will pay those debts have been spent there, and you ask questions. Don't say you belong to this particular community or that particular community, or you belong to whatever political persuasion. Explain to you why these dams are not taking off, and show us how they will take off for value, for Kenyans to get the value for money. Then there will be no issue about whether you are targeted or not targeted.
And still in that event, Machakos Governor Alfred Mutua was urging the US and the EU and other developed nations to help Kenya fight corruption by utilizing their databases to name and shame corrupt individuals in Kenya. The governor urged the countries not to allow Kenyan taxpayers to fund the lifestyles of the children and families of these corrupt individuals abroad while Kenyans remain languishing in poverty. He spoke during the launch of a new mass Wrigley confectioneries plant in Athi River, where American Ambassador Kylie McCarter was present along with senior representatives from the mass Wrigley headquarters in Chicago.
These people who are stealing from us, these very high senior government people for that matter, who are stealing from our people, are taking their money and hiding them in your countries. And then now we have to go through our whole judicial system to repatriate the money back. Why can't you stop them from coming to your countries to invest the money there or to hide the money there? You know, name and shame these people. You have the database, you have the corrupt people. Give us a list of shame.
Indeed, name and shame these people. And the teachers from some counties turned up for the first day of training in the competence-based curriculum launched by Education Cabinet Secretary George Magoha. Magoha says the rollout of the new curriculum will continue despite opposition from the Kenya National Union of Teachers.
This CBC is ill-timed. Research has told us that it has collapsed in 8 countries.
If you have somebody who agrees with you all the time, then you are either both fools or one is a liar. So it is very good to continue to identify the problems and we continue to address them. Like from the pre-primary 1 and 2 to primary 1, 2, and 3, you can take it to the bank that there is something going on. You can either decide to see it or close your eyes.
Dr. Mumunzao, who is a governance and security expert. Also, we do have with us Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director at the Horn Institute. Also, we have with us as well Dr. Emmanuel Kisiangani, who is director at the Lessons Land Center. So we shall be engaging on this and a lot of other issues as well. But let me just read one or two tweets that we have here. We have Kirinyaga Fine saying, but FK, all right, I shouldn't even have picked that, was silent when al-Bashir was crippling Sudan's economy with his greed. How fake are they right now? We have also Brian saying, this is Brian Kips, hey, hey, hey. But the AU was silent when Bashir was in power. How ironical now they should say that now the military should be given 3 months actually to check into place or hand over power to the civilians. Also, we have D. Muriuki saying, while Kenyan government loots are present, you have the UAE, I should say, which has formed a ministry of possibilities to engage its future. Do we hate our country this much? Ministry of possibilities, ministries of, or the Ministry of Happiness also is down there at the UAE as well. So let's see from our panelists as far as Sudan is concerned right now and this particular pronouncement. First of all, you can actually speak to that particular clip you just ran our viewers by. That is Kendaka, that particular woman who is a poster child of Sudan's, protest. Dr. Hassan Kanaj.
I think she's a true queen. The title, I think, actually captures, listening to her profound words that the bullet doesn't kill. It's the silence of the people that kills. I think captures the entire imagination and a sense of possibilities that can actually be brought by people power. Now, of course, I tweet there, it's wondering why, the AU, perhaps African leaders, did not say anything while al-Bashir was in power, and then all of a sudden they're asking the military council to transition to civilian rule. Part of it, it is not the business of the African Union, first of all, with regard to its constitutive act to choose leaders for a country. However, it is its responsibility to make sure there is no extra constitutional change in government. Now, al-Bashir, good or bad, he was there constitutionally in line with the Sudanese constitution. And anything outside, let's say, peaceful democratic change, you could not justify removing from power, even though, of course, we know the obvious. And so with regard to law and the practice actually of the African Union, if we just have to follow the law and the norms, how things are practiced, it is right in order for them to ask for the military council, which of course has suspended all constitutional institutions in the country, for them to be able to be in power, to make sure they're transitioning to a more democratic civilian government. Now, as a neighbor to Sudan, I think that's also a lesson, and is a lesson that hopefully other leaders around the region are paying attention to. Just in the last several months, we have seen things happen in Algeria. Before that, of course, it had happened in Zimbabwe. Now it's happening in Sudan. And ironically, of course, there is currently a summit being hosted by General Sisi on Sudan and Libya. And the irony is, I think there is a move to change the constitution to allow him to rule up to 2030 or beyond. And it's almost contradictory because on the one hand, if we're trying to transition to civilian rule and make sure stuff like that doesn't happen, then also we have a leadership within the African Union actually doing exactly the opposite. I think there has to be a point of introspection, and perhaps the AU should look at itself in the mirror and say, well, why am I speaking with both sides of my mouth? It does not really bode very well. And perhaps we should move towards revising some of the principles in the Constitutional Act to make it very clear that, for instance, if you're a military leader, you just can't be allowed to put thousands of people in prison so that you don't have any competitor, or neither can you just be allowed to keep changing the constitution because you say, well, the parliament approved it. We have seen how parliaments are bought in this part of the world. I think that is something, should be a lesson, and hopefully, as the Horn region and East Africa, I don't think we should go back to, for instance, where some countries have gone back to. We should move in the direction that is more democratic, that is more open. Now, transitions have to be managed carefully, even this current transition. The military council, as terrible as perhaps some people may think, if it does not manage that transition very well, Sudan can so easily descend into chaos. And that is why it does need a lot of help. And of course, we can see perhaps Sisi is trying to do something about it. You just don't want to end up like Libya, which is now a complete mess, and no one wants to take responsibility for it. So as a region and as Africans, we really have to own this as our problem, not a foreign problem, and we have to make an intervention to solve it.
All right, let's hear from Dr. Emmanuel Kisengani.
Yeah, I think to begin with, that lady is certainly quite inspirational in a context of Sudan, a Muslim society which is largely, to an extent, seen to be conservative. So I think she's quite inspiring to other cases, especially on the continent. In relation to what the AU's position is, I think we need to look at who is the AU and who is speaking. The message came from Cairo, where you have Al-Sisi heading the AU, and is the one who's making these pronouncements, giving the military council 3 months to make reforms. So the issue is contradictions in terms of what he's doing in his own country and what he's pronouncing. I think the AU has been very good when it comes to pronouncements. It has very good statutes. It has very good policies. It has, for instance, the African Charter on Elections, Governance and Democracy, which prescribes very good things about how to go around promoting democracy. But the challenge has been implementation. So I'm here even just wondering, they prefer that the military council has 3 months. If within those 3 months nothing happens, what tools do you have to do anything? They don't have anything. They don't have the carrots and the sticks. So other than possibly saying we'll exclude you from AU processes, they don't have much more else to do. On the last aspect of transitions, I agree with Dr. Kanenje that transitions can be quite a challenge. In Sudan, it looks like those who are seeking changes seem to have clarity about where they want to go. Often in societies, people will advocate for changes, we want reforms, but they don't visualize the end result. But here it looks like they're clear they want a civilian rule. But in a context like that, where we have had military regimes in a society for a very long time, it can be very difficult. These fellows control resources, they control the military. And if it appears as if they are threatened, sometimes they even take measures to reverse these transitions. So I think it needs a little balancing act that you may need civilians, but they may have to find a way to work with people from previous regimes.
Right. Right, we want to take a short break. When we circle back, of course, we continue with Dr. Mumonzao. But interesting enough, what Dr. Kanenje and also Dr. Kisengani is saying about, of course, speaking from both sides of the mouth, this is what has been aptly captured by Gado as we take a short break today. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is the AU chairman right now. But look at what is happening in his country so far. Look at the judiciary. It has been caged. You can see the caged bird there. The military is gagged. Parliament also is under his control. And that's the new pharaoh and who is the chair of the AU. So when he says that, yeah, we're giving the Sudan's government or the military 3 months to actually shake into place and transfer the power to the civilians, how, of course, ironical it is that he also is extending his term to 2030. We take a short break right now. You're watching Standing on Guard. hand over power to the civilians. We just want to hear from Dr. Momon Zhao. Before we took a short break, we promised also to circle back with him and to give us his views of what he thinks about South Sudan and the protest and the regime change as well.
Yeah, thank you, Debarl. In 1979, Theda Skocpol wrote a book called Social Revolution. Mm-hmm. And the catchphrase in that book is, no bourgeois, no revolution. So it might look like a populist change in the Sudan is a good thing. People are asking for change and all that. There's a lot of peaceful, contentious politics, which is a good thing. A lot of peaceful protesters on the streets and so on. They seem to know what they are doing. They are organized. But change needs to be well managed, like Dr. Kanenje was saying in terms of transitions. When you talk about no bourgeois, no revolution, mostly you have to find out who is behind this kind of change, and there is an old regime and an incoming regime. Mm-hmm. And if the stakes are too high, then like Dr. Kisiangani was saying, if the stakes are too high, then you're likely to have problems. You could have reversions into even more deeper authoritarian contexts. Mm-hmm. So it's important that the change is managed. I was just looking at page 37 here. Few dollars hit tea exports to Sudan, this report by Gerald and I. And Sudan remains one of the key markets to Kenya's tea, earning the country over $5 billion in the past 3 years. So the region is affected by these kind of changes and so on. It is, Professor Hegel said, George Hegel said, society deserves the government it gets. We cannot be overly critical of leaderships without understanding the environment under which they operate. And it's very important that we be cognizant of some of those realities as we move forward. We want to trust that Sudan will stabilize. Mm-hmm. It will not degenerate into even what happened in Egypt, for instance. How many times did people go back to Tahrir? And what did they get in the end? Mm-hmm. The leader they got, they then just prosecuted him altogether in a matter of a year or so. So these are very important things that we must be careful around. The AU is doing what is expected of a regional institution. Forget about saying, if it's Al-Sisi's problem. It's an AU issue. And because it's an AU issue, the AU is sticking to the what is supposed to be done. For instance, they have said, kindly hasten this transitional phase to allow for, a civilian, authority, civilian constitution, and so on, and that is a good thing. And if that should be followed through, it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And we trust that that is the direction the country is going.
Thank you.
But one thing you do, you don't shock a system. Like I said last time, for every reaction, there's a reaction. It must be weaned through so that the transitional phase works out properly. There might not even be the right constitutional and administrative structures in place. Mm-hmm. So we need to let Sudan move slowly by its own pace.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's also move on and see what is on this week's the East African, which also I think really is smack dab in the middle of what we're discussing. The issues to do with terrorism. We just ran a story by you of Sri Lanka blast and the update where we have also new measures from the president. And the river of dollars flowing from Juba into Kenya, Uganda, Nairobi and Kampala have failed to stop the flow of illicit money through their economies and are now facing the risk of blacklisting by the global financial regulators. You have this story tucked away on page 4 of the East African this week, And of course, money laundering, we know how it is aiding and abating terrorism. Just last week, we had also on the front page of the Daily Nation, this particular woman. Let me try and lift that for you again, for you to see this particular woman. It says, most dangerous woman. That's a probing question they were asking. The suspect was first arrested by Kenyan police while trying to cross into Somalia in 2014. And this is Halima Aden in Mombasa courts in 2015 when she was denied terrorism charges. The US says she is one of the 7 individuals in the world who financed the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, popularly known as ISIS. The US says Halima Aden Ali, who is believed to be living in Mariakani, uses the Hawala system of money transfer to finance ISIS militants. And the story continues on page 4 of the Daily Nation. So you can juxtapose that and what is on the front page of the East African, and I just also hand it over to our panelists. Money laundering, this is a big menace. It has not been, of course, aptly tackled. We know even right now there were challenges also in Parliament where we had the CBK governor, you know, when we had this financial bill amendment bill that was on the floor of the House, where we have a capping of anything that is beyond $1 million shillings should be declared to the bank and where this money is coming from. Those were just some of the measures that are put in place to try and curb, you know, illicit money or money laundering for that matter. So just looking at that, we can begin with you, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, and just tell us, money laundering, what measures should we actually be if we are facing to be blacklisted by the global financial reports or regulators, then it means also there's a lot of trafficking of money in this country that is illegal and is aiding and abetting terrorism. What happened at Dusut, we also know, was someone who transferred a huge chunk of money through the M-Pesa as well.
You know, if in fact we're facing potential sanctions from international regulators, it's actually a right thing, and it's something we should expect. There is no country, including the United States, the maximum, if you have to deposit $10,000, it's actually going to show up on the system. And someone's going to have to ask you, first of all, where do you get that money from, and you pay taxes on them. The Kenyan government should not be begging members of parliament or any citizen when it comes to ensuring that there is no money laundering and that every shilling is actually accounted for. It's extremely shameful to see people who claim to represent Kenyans wanting to be exempted to, perhaps, I guess that is how they want to find a chance to loot millions and billions. Now, what just happened in the context, for instance, of national security for us? Of course, we've not discussed Sri Lanka, but shadowy groups thrive in an environment where there is less regulation, where someone is not paying close attention because they can be able to wire millions and billions of shillings anywhere, where they're drug traffickers or they're pirates or they're terrorist organizations. And even for us here, the recent January attack on 14 Riverside just goes to illustrate why we should actually have those laws in place. Now, my hope is perhaps the ministries and departments involved in that, they should be able to tell Kenyans and educate them properly so Kenyans can put enough pressure on the politicians to make sure we have sufficient laws that prevent people from actually doing this money laundering. Now, in our neighboring country, of course, as the title in East African, the millions of dollars which are flowing into our economies. Anyone who has driven around Kampala and Nairobi, you know, when you see a South Sudanese number plate, it's probably a very high-end European car. When their country, it is so poor, it has less than 200 kilometers of paved roads. We cannot encourage bad behavior just because we want to accommodate a few people. And I think as a country, we should be firm on that. I think the president, if he has a chance, and he's likely to get complete public support in trying to rein in these things, whether they are domestic, local Kenyan citizens, or neighbors from South Sudan or any other place. But this is something that we have to do. We cannot wait until we're blacklisted by international regulators because a few greedy members of parliament want to have their way. That is not going to be possible. They're less than 500. We're almost 50 million Kenyans right now. That is something that we have to do. with regard to specifics, perhaps I can let some of my colleagues talk about it. But that is a policy we have to put in place, and the central bank or the Kenyan government should not go to any Kenyan citizen to beg to actually be able to prevent money laundering or to make sure that transactions are monitored and are accounted for.
And we want to speak also on this particular headline that we had on the Daily Nation on Thursday about Halima Eden as well, because I know also as Horn Institute we've been working on the ground, especially to make sure that women who are more and more getting dropped into terrorism as well, because we have also this mentality that women, you know, they're more safe, they cannot be perpetrators of terrorism as well. But she is actually a poster child of somebody who's aiding and abetting terrorism as well. What you can just give us a brief of what really happens with your program as well as Brave, and how you're also making sure that you can countermanding what the terrorists are doing in trying to drop women into terrorism.
The gendered approach, especially to study and in countering and violent extremism, terrorism, is something that had been ignored for a very long time. But increasingly, practitioners and even government is actually recognizing the important role that women play. It's not just as conduits, but actually as key players and perpetrators and even suicide bombers themselves. And we've seen it even in the region that happened. And so it's something that we have to sensitize, not just the security services, but including our communities. Because the trouble is, when you see a female, generally, because of how we are cultured, you tend to be less suspicious that they're going to do something. Even when you're walking into malls, sometimes you see some of our sisters not really being frisked. But when you're a guy being frisked, what if that person is actually carrying 10 bombs or suicide vests, you know, with her? And I think we should move in the direction of of course, we have to learn to live with each other, but at the same time, we need to see the increasing role and perhaps focus also more resources with regard to making sure that we don't have increased radicalization of our girls, because normally it starts pretty young, you know, when they're teenagers, some of them in their 20s. It's not likely that you're going to find a lot of people in their 40s or 50s or 60s actually doing it. So this group that we've neglected for so long, I think we just need to invest more resources. We need to build more intelligence and more relationships on both from family levels, community levels with regard to collecting intelligence, because they tend to know actually a whole lot more than the fathers and even the brothers. Most of the time they're actually out. So if we move more aggressive in that direction, I think we're likely going to be a lot more successful than we are today. Because what we have seen, the role they play, where their mothers or their sisters, they tend to have a lot of information, but because of the access for them that is limited, because of sometimes the cultural constraints that are placed in place for them, they cannot actually supply that information or even share that information, in part because they don't want to be victimized, in part because they're afraid perhaps of their male relatives or peers, and in part because they just feel vulnerable. This is something we should move as a country and as a region more aggressively actually in making sure that a gendered approach in studying and countering violent extremism and terrorism is something that is, you know, paid more attention, is given more resources, and is more proactively pursued, as opposed to something happenstance. Oh, well, there was a lady, perhaps now we should go and focus on Majengo, you know, because that lady came from Majengo. No, that is not enough. It has to be something collective. We need a paradigm shift actually in the way we address the problem of terror and violent extremism.
Dr. Kiasangani, especially with these alternative sources of transferring money, like the Hawala system as well. I think that this is the second time that such system is being picked before, and it's being used also to aid and abet terrorism or financing or money laundering for that matter.
Yeah. I think it speaks to issues of ability and resources to actually pursue these leads. I know there are countries like the US, there's a lot of information about what is happening about us and not ourselves. So I know this has been happening. There have been allegations even a few years ago that certain groups like Al-Shabaab were getting, say, resources from actors, including from South Africa. So you have these things happening. I think we need to invest more in tracking because it does certainly undermine security if they're not properly policed. I also just wanted to mention something about what you said in the East African, where the dollar flows to the East African region. I know there are debates around say whether money coming into the country from outside, whether it is generally bad or it can be used for good purposes. I know the countries that have built the economies on what we may call illegal money. I'm not trying to rationalize money laundering, but I'm saying there are certain countries that when it comes to money coming into the country, they don't so much look at where it is coming from, but rather if it is clear it is going to help develop that country, and they know that. Some countries accept that. It may be morally wrong, but this issue of money, especially from South Sudan, is not something new. Since independence, we have people there who are quite rich. They've invested here in Kenya, in Lavington and other places, in Uganda, Australia, and elsewhere. And this has been picked out severally, including a few years ago, the US warned the government of South Sudan, actually took to Salva Kiir a list of people who are extremely rich and who had pilfered the state and invested outside. I also know that the UN Security Council is trying to establish an expert team to try and actually track South Sudan and where all this money is going to, with the aim of putting in place targeted sanctions against these people. So in a nutshell, I'm just saying that when it comes to money coming from outside, the debate, some countries, like I've had Malta, if you have a lot of money, you go there and you say, I want to invest, provided it's clear what you want to invest in, they will accept you. But of course, it speaks to challenges around and how do you address the big problem of money laundering.
Right. Dr. Mumunzao.
Yeah, thank you, Debarl. Over the last year, I have been commissioned by Pilgrave Macmillan, alongside other experts, on a research on the political economy of Africa. And my role as an expert was to research on the political economy of terrorism and counterterrorism in Africa. And then through my research, which was concluded and submitted, will be out as a research through Pilgrave Macmillan, I have come across a lot of data to show that you have it's a multifaceted outlook where you have various actors, state actors, like Dr. Kisiangani was insinuating, as well as non-state actors. You will find businesses, and other clandestine, covert processes which are below the table, which are used to subvert the work of security agencies and so on. And it's all part of the wider money laundering processes and banking fraud and so on. Now, what is very important in terms of solutions is what comes out strongly is strong institutions, not only within countries, but countries need to cooperate a lot with wider institutional mechanisms, right from the World Bank, right from IMF, World Bank mostly, right through central banking systems of countries and regional financial mechanisms in order to close these. By the way, the African Union and other African sub-regional institutions have got some of those anti-money laundering arrangements. Now, of course, Debarl, the sad part is that economic crimes are not just about those that are meant for monies to fund terrorism and so on. Part of it is just corruption money that is stashed out there, and these things have happened. It is true that there have been situations where our neighboring countries and so on, and other countries around the world have been accused of abating these kind of vices, and therefore it is not just something that is unique for Kenya in the context and Uganda in the context of South Sudan. South Sudan needs a lot of changing, a lot of institutional mechanisms to ensure that it gets on its feet. There are a lot of things that are not going on right there, but we hope with the current peace process and so on, the country will pull through. Because when that happens also, it becomes a governance vacuum where people do what they want when you have loose internal governance structures. And when that takes place, then you find people then, like what they are calling a river, for funds and all these dollars and all this. So monies and finances end up in the wrong hands. Now we pray that this kind of monies are not the ones that are being used for purposes of engendering violent extremism, but it's a fact that we have local conduits, not only in Kenya but in the region, where funds have been diverted for purposes of even planning terror attacks like we had at Dusit D2. And therefore, our institutions should continue to up their game and ensure that all the loopholes are sealed. I have been encouraged lately that you can go these days to KRA even to do your returns, and you find they are pinpointing to very specific things. Are you a director of a company? Do you return taxes and all this? Do you report all this? They check on a lot of those things, and without any kind of political protectionism or anything like that, these institutions can be helped to work. We have within the DCI, Economic Crimes Unit, which works very closely with the Interpol, and they have a whole joint office around which works on these issues. So it is easy, fairly easy to ensure that some of these things happen, are done right. But of course, Debarl, sometimes it is a little bit too late when you find a bank manager has just accepted to bend the law, and someone withdraws something like 15 million shillings, and it's not exactly known where it is going, where it is coming from, and then it ends up helping terrorists to do bad things. So we must be careful and keep our eye, stand on guard on that one.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to, of course, what happened over the weekend in Sri Lanka, the blast, and we give you the update where right now we know that President Maithripala Sirisena, he has said he will change the heads of the country's defense forces following their failure to prevent suicide bombs that killed over 300 people, despite the fact that they had prior information about the attacks. And we gave you that story earlier in a televised address to the nation. Sirisena said the changes will happen within 24 hours. Indian intelligence officers contacted their Sri Lankan counterparts 2 hours before the first attack to warn of a specific threat on churches. One Sri Lankan defense source and an Indian government also told reporters. Another Sri Lankan defense source said a warning came hours before the first strike. And Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attacks on Tuesday without providing evidence of its involvement. Let's just begin with this. Do you think this should be the solution, first of all, that heads should roll because they never acted on, they have never acted on this intelligence? And what can we extrapolate from this particular scenario to our country? Because we've had same scenario, and information is, yes, there was actually, intelligence that was given before for various maybe embassies, high commissions here in the country that actually told the Kenyan authority that yes, this and this will happen in such a mall or such as a particular place, and they never acted on intelligence. So here we have the president now acting firmly and saying head should roll because you never acted on the intelligence that was received. Dr. Wanenje.
Debarl, Sri Lanka is only about a decade removed from a 30-year civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. If you remember, the battle between Tamil Tigers and the Sri Lankan government for a very long time was extremely bloody. In fact, some of the very first mass suicide bombings and regular suicide bombings in the world were actually taking place in Sri Lanka many, many years before they started taking place in Palestine. And so that is something that I think should be remembered. However, heads rolling, it's a good thing when people were sleeping on the job. Heads rolling, it won't make any consequence when everybody else was sleeping on the job, including that president. Now, in Sri Lanka, there's a dynamic here that makes things difficult, that will even make things difficult for heads to roll, for instance. There's been a divide between the Prime Minister and the President. And I think one of, the president, one who alluded to the politics of it in Sri Lanka that's making it impossible for him to actually get information, the defense minister to get information. But now, what that, for instance, says to us is any information that is supplied by anybody, I think needs to be investigated. The Deputy Inspector General of Sri Lanka had this information more than 2 weeks ago from the Internal Intelligence Service. And even hours before the attack, they had very specific information with a very specific name of a person who apparently has been on Sri Lanka's intelligence radar for the last 2 years. But no action was taken. I think that is what complacency does. You think we've never been attacked. You think the terrorist threat is too small in our region, or perhaps it's been so long since it happened. Then you go to sleep. The terror threat is still real, and it's current. Now, with the defeat of ISIS and ISIL in the, or what we call Daesh, in the Middle East, they are trying to find other softer targets to demonstrate their relevance. And so if they can be able to do what they did last week, of course going to occupy the international community for the next several months, that is a success for them. And so as a country, as a region, we have to remain vigilant and make sure that every information that is supplied, whether by a citizen or by a foreign intelligence organization, it should be pursued to its utmost conclusion, because failure to do that results into what we have seen, a very sad situation in Sri Lanka. How Sri Lanka is going to cope with it, of course, is a different matter. I don't think it's sufficiently equipped to deal with the terrorist threat at this current stage, because this is not something they've been dealing with for quite some time now. Previously, it was the Tamils, was the enemy they knew. Today, it's actually the enemy they are going to be new to. And hopefully we learn lessons from this and realize that Al-Shabaab and ISIS and Boko Haram, just when we think they are on their deathbed, they can always surprise, and they still have some capacity to actually do a lot of damage. And so I think we should remain vigilant as a country and make sure that as citizens and as government, as they say in the United States, when you see something, say something. When you hear something, say something, because that is the only thing that's going to protect all of us, and no one should be exempt from it.
Right. You know, pundits are saying that this is a retaliation to what happened to New Zealand, when actually we had people in the mosque who were attacked, you know, by the white supremacists, so to speak, or the white terrorists, so to speak. Maybe we can hear from Dr. Emmanuel Kisangani.
Yeah, I think the actual motivation has not been discerned. There is that assertion that it was a revenge attack, but we do not know. I mean, we know that ICIS has claimed responsibility. So perhaps time will tell. Just to go back to what the Prime Minister and his move to have heads roll, in a crisis situation like that, sometimes citizens expect certain things to happen. So you have governments taking this knee-jerk reaction. It's a crisis management tactic, but in terms of whether it is solving a problem or not, I agree with Dr. Kaneje that it may not be the best way. The best way would have been to try and understand the system, what were the loopholes, what were the failures in terms of preempting that. I know the challenges when you have a context where you have not had, say, an attack in the recent past. And also the challenges around what we call early warning. You know, someone coming to tell you this thing is going to happen. You don't really realize the impact it might have until that thing has happened. So often, certain times, people take these things for granted, and I think this was a situation that they had not experienced something similar, and so they waited. It happened. Then you have a prime minister who is taking this knee-jerk reaction. So it may be just to manage the situation, but as a long-term solution, I think there's more that needs to be done to examine the system and see how to try and preempt some of these things. One lesson, I think, in addition to what is just alluded to Dr. Kaneje, is about these extremist groups and the way they target. You know, they survive on that aspect of surprise. They don't go to a place where everyone knows they're going to do this. So try to target areas where perhaps because of that surprise, then you have all this information which they want to capitalize on. And often we've seen, even with Al-Shabaab, every time it looks like Al-Shabaab has been annihilated, They're driven out of Mogadishu, Bakara market, where they used to have a lot of money. People said now they're finished. Then they will do something very dramatic. Similarly, when you had them being driven out of Kismayo, they do something similar, undertake a very big attack just to assert themselves. And this helps them in a number of ways. One, they have a constituents out there just to reassure them that we still exist, and also to help raise funds. So it's an element which is quite evident that some of these groups, including the ICIS and Al-Shabaab and others, every time they look to be on their knees, then they will do some of these very dramatic attacks just to reassert themselves.
Let's say from Dr. Mumo, the fact that also we know that ISIS in Syria is being defeated and they're being driven from their last holds, can also to attest maybe to the fact that there's laxity in the war against terrorism, that yes, right now we have ISIS who are being defeated, but they're morphing into something else in the Philippines as well. Could this also be leading when they know that we have such laxity, and he talks of shock? This is when now they want to hit the most and surprise us.
Yeah, without just saying, calling it, just terrorism. Terrorism is a visual expression of a form or another of violent extremism. And when extremism is taking place, it doesn't take place in a vacuum. It takes place within a social environment, within a political environment. That is why you're seeing all this back and forth between political actors saying that, did the tacticians give us information and so on. At the same time, it is within that military strategic environment that is purely core security involved. The economic factors, regional factors, societal factors, and governance factors. Of course, violent extremists are looking for people who can absorb their narratives and be able to create an environment for them to do that. Right now, I don't want to get into finer discussions around Sri Lanka because it's still an ongoing case. It is a live issue. A friendly government, a friendly people, we need to support them. There are other nuances, other things that cannot be said in this setting. But you see, when you have groups like Abu Sayyaf, like the one you mentioned in Philippines, Jamaatu Halis Lidawat wal Jihad that you call Boko Haram, and these others, all these are extremist groups, and they are looking for places where there is governance vacuums, and these governance vacuums are easily penetrated to ensure that their operations are able to work out. ISIS, if it is true that ISIS has claimed responsibility, that is one side of it. There could be other localized factors inside Sri Lanka that scholars and practitioners are still trying to examine. But of course, it was regrettable. I was very, encouraged. Our head of state sent a message of condolence and condemned the attack with all regional leaders, including other friendly nations around the world. The Pope, who has been fighting a lot for Muslims, for Rohingya Muslims, and working together so that people can have a more harmonious society, was quick to condemn the attack and so on. The Archbishop in Colombo was very balanced, spoke very well without igniting or trying to bring out emotions that would make people to fight, because Sri Lanka is about almost 90% Buddhist.
Yes.
It's not even a Muslim country, it's Buddhist. Muslim is actually just 6%.
Yes.
Christian is in fact just about 7%. So they are both Muslim and Christian are minority in Sri Lanka, and therefore there could be a lot of other variables playing out, and we don't want to discuss them in a manner that would give any credence to terrorists and their sympathizers anywhere in the world at this point. And therefore, what I would say is that at the end of the day, one biggest lesson we must learn is that as countries is that violent extremism is an international phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It affects different societies, different ways, and it should not be, countries should be on the lookout, and societies should be encouraged to coexist and to by all means stay away from extremist values and so on, because that is the only way our societies can coexist. And at the same time, security institutions, agencies, and so on should continue to share information and to guard that informational space in a manner that by the time information is somewhere, then it is what we call in technical language actionable. Because if I just tell you something will happen and I'm not telling you exactly how, when, where, and by whom, then there are a lot of loose ends. But at this point, our condolences to the entire Sri Lankan community, our people, and we feel, we empathize as a country that has been and so on. And you can never say that, you cannot say, Dusit was better, Garissa was better. Do you know, just in 2017, on October 14, this one, Harakat Al-Shabaab Al-Mujahideen, 585 people, 585 is rated the third highest, the worst terror attack in world history. That one that happened in Mogadishu on the 14th of October 2017. So it's very important that we take this very seriously, work together, and encourage our people to coexist.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. Now, Israel, as we ran the story earlier for you, has said it will name a new community on the Golan Heights after US President Donald Trump as an expression of gratitude for his recognition of its claim of sovereignty over the strategic plateau. Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria in 1967 war and annexed it in a move not recognized internationally. The United States broke with other world powers last month when Trump signed a decree recognizing Israeli sovereignty there. Trump's Golan move followed his decision in December 2017 to recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, breaking with decades of US policy over the status of a city contested by the Palestinians. Israel has said separately that in appreciation of the US president, it intends to name a proposed train station near Jerusalem's western wall after him. Maybe we could just speak to this development and the bromance between, Donald Trump and Netanyahu. Many people say Donald Trump, yes, despite the fact that people were a bit antsy with his, him taking the leadership of the United States, but also we have the extremists or the leftists saying that, or the conservatives for that matter, saying that Donald Trump is the person who has had, that particular cheek of doing other bravery acts, like now naming Jerusalem or taking the embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and now even the Golan Heights, which other presidents like Ronald Reagan or even Bill Clinton and Jim Carter over the years have never been able to do. Some people think that actually he's the main man that in the Bible was to help Israel be what it is today. Let's hear from Dr. Kanenje on this.
There's always a problem when you, number one, you elect toddlers in a White House or to be president, but number two, where your supporters are messianic ideologues. Trump could as well just, Netanyahu could just as well rename Israel Trumprael. I think he's so much in love with Donald Trump that he wouldn't mind changing the name of Israel. Now, the thing is, that is not courageous. Mm-hmm. Courage is actually going against the tide. He is not. You cannot compare Donald J. Trump with Clinton, Reagan, or Barack Obama. Reagan's own kids do not support Donald Trump. A courageous decision will actually be to go against the tide. Now, while the status quo has been maintained, it is very clear that the international community at large, outside Trump White House, and I'm saying Trump White House because I can promise you things will change post-Trump with regard to the policy in the Middle East. They are not about to recognize a grabbed land from the war of 67 to be as part of Israel. Number two, the moves that Trump has been making has actually ensured that whatever remains of Palestine will neither become a state or is it going to be viable if it does. The two-state solution pretty much is dead at this stage. So this magic formula they are having with the Middle East peace process, I don't know where it's going to come from because it was supposed to speak with the two-state solution. Today, as we speak with the current demarcations, with the current recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which is supposed to be a final status issue to be negotiated by both parties, completely kills the possibility of a two-state solution. What most people normally don't understand is what remained Gaza and West Bank, they're not contiguous. They're actually separate. Now Israel is right in between here. You need a viable state. Economically, you need a state that can have borders. So you can't have a state that actually can't be sovereign, and it cannot be viable, and it's not contiguous. And so what Trump has done has actually made sure that he puts a final nail in the possible peace process in the Middle East. It's not going to happen. He won't get it. Perhaps we can start talking about the peace in the Middle East in post-Trump era. But at this stage, he has made things so difficult. He has taken the path of least resistance. Why? Because he wants to appease the evangelical right, especially in the Bible Belt in the United States. He's not doing this actually because of any practical success, because he cannot achieve peace. So this is a decision of a coward, not a courageous president. And he has been a coward most of his time anyway, and a lot of decisions he's been taking, they're not calculated to actually aid any stability in the Middle East. So I would not say he's courageous. Now, of course, if you believe in, you live in a la-la land, and therefore you think this is now the Messiah has come back, you're going to buy what Trump is doing. But what people don't understand is actually the practical aspects. Now, as peacemakers and people who love to have peace and stability in the world, you want to go with things that are practical and things can actually achieve results. And what Trump is doing exactly the opposite. He won't succeed in the Middle East. He will not succeed in Korea. He's not going to succeed in anything, not even with negotiations over China. Part of it because of his approach. He wants to be on top. He wants praise all the time. He won't be able to get it. And chances are, if Democrats nominate someone who is good, we're going to see this guy out of power in November 4th of next year.
And we saw this also driving a wedge between President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu in regard also to the Iran nuclear deal as well. I think that is where we had a very frosty relationship between Israel and the United States as well. Maybe you can speak to that, a stark reality or a stark difference between Barack Obama and Netanyahu, and of course not Barack Obama, but Donald Trump now and Netanyahu as well.
Yeah, I think Dr. Kaneja is in a better place to expound on this, especially Donald Trump and the U.S. and foreign policy. From what I see, I think it looks like Obama was more motivated about the desire to have lasting peace in the Middle East. It looks like Trump is more interested in doing things differently, regardless of whether it is for greater good or not. So here like he has just observed, you have interests. Of course, Netanyahu will want it to happen that way. It embellishes his own leverage internally. I'm told it did help him in the recent elections when he made pronouncements around annexing more land. So it serves his interest. And we also know, like he's observed, we have, but the Jewish influence in the US. So it also serves Trump's interest and I think stature within certain sections of society there. So I think here the question is in terms of, because you have two sides of the conflict in the Middle East, so to what extent does this move help to actually address the problem and promote a lasting peace? I'm not quite sure. I know it serves possibly Israeli interest, but I'm not sure that it helps in terms of addressing the very historical grievances at the heart of this conflict. What I'm saying that Obama seemed to try and actually find a solution that is acceptable to both sides. It looks like Trump is not interested in that.
All right, let's hear from Dr. Momunzao.
Yeah, Debarl, let me not, call names straight like Trump and Netanyahu and so on, but go a little bit historically into some of these things. The historicity behind this kind of situation is broad and it is long. It is not something new. Likud party is very conservative. What do you call the Republican? When you have a Republican president and so on. Now Republicans tend to be bullish, sort of. They are not. I mean, they are hawkish and not sort of dovish compared with Democrats and so on. And that is probably the difference between Obama and Trump and so on. Now, one scholar said, Trump said, only Nixon went to Beijing, Richard Nixon. So, it took a Republican who is hawkish to take the bull by its horns. And, so people always say, only Nixon went to Beijing. Now, President Trump has had that kind of disposition as a Republican. He went to North Korea. He went to, all these places and so on. And therefore, at every point in history, you find a confluence sometimes of rightist ideology. At other times, you have a confluence of more moderate ideology. You remember during Clinton and that is the late Jacques Rabin, who was assassinated because of trying to, because of this boy who thought that he was talking with enemies and so on. And you remember President Anwar Sadat and his assassination in 81 and so on. So all these are issues about ideology. And I think sometimes when you have, the very extreme rightist and confluence between two extremist rightists, you have that kind of thing. For example, there's a scholar who has researched and found that each time, for example, Israel is under many attacks and threatened, the next time, if that leader was Labour, the next leader will be Likud, because people will tend to conflate, to sort of percolate around that rightist thing. And so, right now, U.S. politics is within the mid-cycle, so they are coming to the second round, and therefore all these are part of the nuances. But let's beyond that, I really loved what Pope Francis said. Debarl, I'm not a Christian, but I really admire what sometimes the Pope says when he said that Jerusalem should be seen as a place where all religions should come together and be seen as a multi-religious place where you have the dome, the arch of the dome, and the church and all that, and that's a good thing.
Right, thank you. Right, as we're winding up, also just also to remind you what was on the Daily Nation. This is the Sunday Nation as well. This is about the Chief of Defense, Modade, who his term will be expiring soon. Modade steps off the helm of armed forces without clear-cut legacy. And maybe we can just hear from also our panelists as we're winding up briefly, 30 seconds. Who do you think will be the next CDF? Let's begin with you, Hassan Khaneja, very briefly.
It is not easy to make an assessment of legacies of CDFs. Much of it because a lot of things are actually done by them not exactly something that is apparent to the public. Now, unless, let's say, you were a war general who led the country into, war with another country, it is, so far, one thing we have seen is that our security services and our military, there's been actually a market improvement on a number of fronts. We've been able to learn some lessons during our operations, for instance, in Somalia, and I think the direction that we're moving is positive, but with regard now to the specifics, I think it's going to be unfair to actually assess whether they're based on things perhaps that hearsay and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think he's been on
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, let's hear from Kisangani very briefly as we're winding up.
Yeah, I think the Madere, he did what was supposed to do, normal things. He had limited leeway in doing things differently, just like the military works. Most appointments are done by the head of state. So in terms of his own footprint, I think it is not very different from what others have done. It's not very outstanding. It's the normal things. To try and see who then will replace him, I think we give the president the benefit of doubt. He has a balancing act to do, and there's people to choose from.
Right. Dr. Mwazao, briefly,
yeah,
30
that's
seconds.
right. General Mwadede is a brave officer. He's a very courageous officer. He's an officer I know. I have trained a lot of officers in that cadre, and I'm happy. We have been reviewing Kenya Army at 55. It's a very nice book that has been done by Kenya Army in marking 55 years of service to the nation. And then these are very good things. Now, it is not about Matete and so on, it's about institutions. And it goes back to the years of General Tonje when they created institutions. So there's normally a board that sits and makes its recommendations through the Commander-in-Chief himself. And we shall be having a new general. There's normally a rotation between Army, Air Force, and Navy. And those are just institutional things. There's not any kind of political kind of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's a great officer.
Dr. Mwazao, who is a governance and security expert, thank you for coming through also this morning. Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director of the Holmes Institute, thank you also for coming through. And also, we want to thank you, Dr. Emmanuel Kisangani, who is the director at the Lessons Learned Center. Thank you for coming through as well. Thank you for your valid company and also your reactions on Twitter. We've been actually taking a keen look on what is happening internationally as far as security is concerned, also here in the country as far as also our safety is concerned. Thank you again for your valid company. My name is Debarl Inea.